أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقه قولي ربنا زدنا علما اللهم فقهنا في الدين إلهي آمين. I welcome you all to our Ummhatul Momineen series, and today inshallah we'll be covering Salma radiallahu anha's conclusion, part 3, last part of Salma radiallahu anha. So going back to the intro, how the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam got married to her, just to do a quick recap to you all, that she was someone who was amongst the early converts of Islam. She got married to a person, a Sahabi named as Abu Salama radiallahu an, and they both had a happy marriage. Once they migrated to Medina, Abu Salama radiallahu an passed away after the Battle of Uhud, and that's when the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam sent a proposal of marriage to Salama radiallahu anha. When he sent the proposal, Salama radiallahu anha mentioned to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam that, Ya Rasulullah, I am a woman with many children. Meaning, why would you want to get married to me? Because I am an old woman, plus the fact that I have a lot of children. And what did the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam say? He said, I am a man with children as well. Your children will be mine. So subhanAllah, we can see the motive over here, that the reason behind getting married to multiple women in the life of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam wasn't out of lust or love. It was in order to help them out, give love, compassion, shelter, and a home to these women who were either widowed or a divorcee. So that was the empathy of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, that he didn't just approach women who were virgin, who were single, but he also sent proposals to women who were widowed and they have children. And they had children. So Salama radiallahu anha agreed to get married to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and they both had a very happy marriage, as we discussed in part 1 and part 2. So when Salama radiallahu anha got married to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, of course her children came to join the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam at his house as well. So when Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam married Salama radiallahu anha, her daughter Zainab, she joined in the blessed household as well. And Zainab was the daughter of Salama and Abu Salama, right? But because Salama radiallahu anha got married to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, Zainab radiallahu anha moved in as well. And at this point of time, she was an infant. So basically, she grew up considering Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam as her father, instead of Abu Salama, who was his real biological father. Now, because Abu Salama radiallahu an passed away very early on, Zainab radiallahu anha had no memories of her real father. All she knew was spending time with her stepfather. And who is he? The best man on the face of the earth, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So a question often comes to mind: is a person's stepfather their mahram or not? And what is the definition of mahram? Mahram is someone whom you cannot get married to. Mahram is someone in front of whom you can be without your hijab. Okay? So the question is a person's stepfather their mahram or not? And the answer to that question is yes. How do we know this? We know it from Surah Nisa, ayah number 23, that stepchildren or stepdaughters is mahram to the dad. So what does this tell us? That the stepdaughter here is the wife's daughter. A man is regarded as a mahram to the daughters of a woman whom he marries and with whom he consummates the marriage. It becomes permissible for them, for those stepgirls, for the stepchildren, not to observe hijab in front of their father. So inshallah, in today's class, we will discuss the role of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam as a stepfather. And subhanallah, if we think about it, this is a topic which is often swept under the rug and subhanallah, most often ignored in almost all lectures and khutbahs, right? So we want to address this topic, inshallah, because many a times what we mostly discuss is the fact that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam was an ideal husband, he was an ideal teacher, but we rarely talk about the prominent role he played being a stepfather. So inshallah, let's zoom into his life history and specifically discuss those moments where Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam had interaction with his stepchildren. So it's mentioned that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam loved Salama radiallahu anha's daughter Zainab a lot. Subhanallah, he loved her a lot. And when Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam married Salama radiallahu anha, Zainab radiallahu anha was around 1 or 2 years old. She was very young. And Zainab's real name, Salama's daughter Zainab's real name was actually Barrah. But the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam changed it to Zainab. Why is that so? Because Barrah literally means someone who is very devout, someone who's very extremely righteous, highly dutiful. And the Prophet ﷺ did not recommend names that portrayed exaggerative praise. So he would say that no one knows who is the most devout or the most dutiful. It is only Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala who knows it. And all people, humans, we are bound to make mistakes. So these kind of names that portray extreme praise in exaggeration, they are not recommended. So the Prophet ﷺ changed her name from Barrah to Zainab. And by the way, what does Zainab literally means? Zainab means the jewel of her father's jewel. Subhanallah, what a beautiful meaning. And think about the impact that is going to have on Zainab radiallahu anha later on, when she finds out what her name means and who is the one who gave her this name. It wasn't Abu Salama, it wasn't her biological father who gave her this name that meant her father's jewel. Rather, it was her stepdad who gave her this name. So of course, subhanallah, later when she grew up and she understood the meaning of her name and this name and understood the fact that this name was given to her by the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, of course, it strengthened her relationship with the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And it increased the respect she had for him, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So the Prophet ﷺ loved Zainab radiallahu anha a lot. And anytime the Prophet ﷺ would enter his house, meaning when he would return to his house, rather than calling his wife, he would call Zainab. And how would he address her? He would say, "Where is our Zainab?" Notice the choice of words. He could have said, "Where is Zainab?" He could have said, "Where is your little one?" Because Zainab was literally the daughter of Salama, not the child of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam could have chosen either of these words. But what did he choose to say instead? He said, "Where is our Zainab?" And that isn't just one incident when he did that. Anytime he would return to his home, every single time, this is how he would address and he would call her by saying, "Where is our Zainab?" And subhanAllah, that's the general protocol of any father or stepfather, right? That subhanAllah, this implies love and compassion in the heart of children, and it strengthens the relationship of the person with his wife as well, because the wife understands the fact that this person whom I have got married to, he accepts my children. as his own children. He doesn't differentiate between his children and my children. And subhanAllah, that speaks volumes about the kind of love and compassion they both had in their relationship. So the Prophet ﷺ would come to his house and he would immediately start playing with little Zainab radiallahu anha, because just like we said before, she was either 1 or 2 years old. So the Prophet ﷺ would play with her. Again, let's pause and think about this. Who is this person? The Prophet ﷺ is not a person who's jobless, who doesn't have anything to do. He's not a person who is retired, so he has a lot of time to play with his children, so on and so forth. He is the most busiest man. He has a mission to fulfill. He has Islam to be conveyed to non-Muslims. All the time he is being harassed. He's under threat of being killed. He has people to teach. He has students coming in back and forth to learn the Quran. He's very busy. He has 4 people coming in asking for help. He has to take care of them. He has to take care of the residents of the city of Medina, who are under the leadership of the Prophet ﷺ. So he's not just a father, he is a leader, he is a husband, he is a teacher, he is a mentor, he's a counselor. SubhanAllah, he is wearing multiple hats. Yet, just think about it, he has time to play with his children, and not just his children, someone who is his stepdaughter. He has time to play with her. What does this tell us about the character of the Prophet ﷺ? And the love of Rasulullah ﷺ for little Zainab radiallahu anha was so much that Zainab's uncle Ammar radiallahu anh would often say that Zainab has come in between Rasulullah and the rest of our family. Meaning he would portray positive jealousy as to the fact that we hardly get any time with the Prophet ﷺ now that Rasulullah is busy playing with Zainab. SubhanAllah, that's how much Rasulullah ﷺ would love Zainab radiallahu anha. And this tells us about the psychological impact of love and compassion that takes place on children from very early on. SubhanAllah, if we take care of our children, show them love and affection from a very young age, it helps them to become confident, happy individuals later on in their life. And subhanAllah, this is something which is proven by research. For instance, in 2010, researchers at Duke University Medical School found that babies were very affectionate and attentive as the mothers gave them love and attention. The children grew to be much happier, more resilient, and less anxious adults. Those children specifically to whom the mothers gave a lot of attention when they were children, when they were babies. So the study involved about 500 people who were followed from when they were infants until they were in their 30s. So when the babies were 8 months old, psychologists observed their mothers' interactions with them as they took several developmental tests. And the psychologists rated the mother's affection and attention level on a 5-point scale, ranging from negative to extravagant. And nearly 10% of the mothers showed low levels of affection. 85% demonstrated a normal amount of affection, and about 6% of the mothers showed high levels of affection. 30 years later, those same individuals were interviewed about their emotional health. The adults whose mothers showed extravagant love and affection were much less likely than the others to feel stressed and anxious. They were also less likely to report hostility, distressing social interactions, and psychosomatic symptoms. So, subhanAllah, what do we see over here? That the way the Prophet ﷺ addressed children, showed love and affection to them from a very early age, truly had an impact on these individuals later on in their life when they became adults. How do we know this? Because Zainab radiallahu anha, the daughter of Salma radiallahu anha, later on grew up to be a scholar of Islam. She grew up to narrate many ahadith of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, in particular from her mother and from the other wives of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So much so that she also became known as the great jurist of Medina, even though that she was a woman. Despite the fact that she was a female, she became a great jurist of Medina and was referred to as the most knowledgeable woman of her time. Meaning people, Sahaba, would come with questions to her since she was considered as an alima, as a scholar. And it's not just the case with Salama radiallahu anha's children. Even when we speak about the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam's first wife, Khadija radiallahu anha, remember, even she was a widow. So when the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam got married to her, even she had children from her previous marriage. And the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam accepted all of them. And subhanAllah, all of them started living in the household of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam had no issues with that. And this is something so different to the time that we live in. Because even if there is a divorcee man, or someone whose wife has passed away, when they think about getting remarried, what's their first term or clause that they put in place? They say, I do not want someone who has children from her previous husband. So they're okay to get married to a divorcee or a widow, but they don't want children coming into their house. Why? Because it adds to the responsibility. It brings in multiple factors that needs to be taken care of later on in life. So they just want to avoid this subject altogether. But in the case of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, what do we see? If the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam wished, he could have got married to, subhanAllah, virgin woman, single woman, whoever he wished. However, he chose to get married to a widow. He chose to get married to a woman with multiple children. He chose to get married to a divorcee in order to teach the Ummah, in order to teach all of us that this is something very reward worthy, and this is something which is permissible in Islam, and not just permissible, but highly recommended. Subhanallah. So all of them started living in the house of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the children of Khadija radiallahu anha, and the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam gave them fatherly love. And the beautiful thing about the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam is that he never felt like these children are creating any interference in his marital life. He did not build a separate house for them so that they can be dealt with separately. No, he gave them love and affection just like any biological father would give. For instance, it's mentioned that when Khadija radiallahu anha married the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, her daughter and son from her two previous marriages moved with her as well, meaning they also moved into the household of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And her children grew up with Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, accepting Islam, being Muslims. And her daughter, meaning the daughter of Khadija radiallahu anha, had so much reverence and respect for the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam that when she grew up and she had, she got married and she had a son, she named her son Muhammad. So she was commonly known as Muhammad, the mother of Muhammad. Again, think about this from a psychological perspective. Who names their children by the name of their stepdad? No one does. At least, subhanAllah, I don't know of any such person who names their children with their stepfather. So this shows the positive impact Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam had in her life, meaning the daughter of Khadija radiallahu anha, and in the life of all his stepchildren. Subhanallah, that they truly admired him and they truly respected him and had a lot of reverence for him. Khadija radiallahu anha's son from her previous marriage, his name was Hind. He grew up with the Prophet ﷺ and learned from him and participated in major battles alongside with the Prophet ﷺ as well. Again, if the son of Khadija radiallahu anha wanted, he could have opted out from this. He could have said, I never signed up for this. I don't want to be part of all the stress going on. So I want to move on with my own life, being a mushrik. Because his biological dad was a mushrik. He could have done that, right? But he didn't. He accepted the religion of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam and supported him by all means, stayed with him at all times. And even to the point that it's mentioned that when someone was about to kill the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the son of Khadija radiallahu anha came right in between the arrow and the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, meaning he injured himself in order to save the life of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. That's how much love and respect he had for his stepfather. Again, when we look at the marriage of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam with Sauda radiallahu anha, again, who is Sauda radiallahu anha? A widow, someone who was very old, and she had 5 children from her previous marriage. And when the Prophet ﷺ married this widow, Sauda radiallahu anha, all her children moved into the household of the Prophet ﷺ, and the Prophet ﷺ accepted all of them and gave them fatherly love. And subhanAllah, the reason why we don't know much about them is because it's early Islam and there wasn't much, much history wasn't recorded at that time in Mecca. A lot of narrations were recorded in Medina when people learned to read and write. So we're talking about a time frame when the Sahaba were oppressed and they struggled to save their lives. Subhanallah, but even at that time of tyranny and persecution going on, the Prophet ﷺ never ever compromised on his time that he would give to his children, whether they were his own children, biological children or not. It didn't matter to him. SubhanAllah, he treated all of them with justice, fairly. So in total, if we look at the children of the Prophet ﷺ and his stepchildren, the Prophet ﷺ had 12 stepchildren altogether. 2 by Khadija radiallahu anha, 5 by Sauda radiallahu anha, 4 by Salma radiallahu anha, and 1 by Habiba radiallahu anha. And all of them, subhanAllah, were fortunate to join the Prophet ﷺ's household because they enjoyed the care and compassion of their caring stepfather. Now, a point to note over here is that if the Prophet ﷺ was so kind and respectful towards his stepchildren, children who didn't belong to him, think about the level of compassion he showed towards his enemies. Even that, subhanAllah, is a topic to discuss because that care and compassion was something that moved the hearts of many of his enemies to accept Islam. When they saw the beautiful character of the Prophet ﷺ, when they witnessed the level of ihsan from the Prophet ﷺ, despite their atrocities, that's what moved them to accept Islam. So truly, the Prophet ﷺ is our role model. And we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that we're all able to follow the footsteps of our Prophet, Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. So going back to the biography of Salama radiallahu anha, just to finalize her session, the event of Kisa also took place in her house. What is the event of Kisa? Kisa literally means the cloak. So it's mentioned by Salama radiallahu anha, who relates that Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wasallam was once wearing a cloak when his daughter Fatima and his son-in-law Ali radiallahu anh was with his family entered the house. So basically, Rasulullah sallallahu is with his wife Salama radiallahu anh, and he gets some visitors. Who are they? It's his daughter and son-in-law. So after sharing the greetings, after exchanging salams, the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam gathered Ali, Fatima, the children Hassan and Hussein radiallahu an, under his cloak, and he prayed to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to purify them, to choose them, to elevate them. Meaning what? That subhanAllah, if you're wearing an abaya, which is subhanAllah very wide, you can think of the butterfly abayas. SubhanAllah, they're so wide that you can actually wrap it around your siblings. That's how wide it is, right? So the Prophet ﷺ was wearing a thobe, which was very wide. So he basically wrapped Ali radiallahu anh, his son-in-law, Fatima radiallahu anha, his daughter, and his grandchildren. And by doing that, he made dua for them. So it was, subhanAllah, sort of a fun activity, a gesture of love along with dua. And that's when the ayah in Surah Ahzab, ayah number 33 was revealed in the Quran, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَقَرْنَ فِي بُيُوتِكُنَّ وَلَا تَبَرَّجْنَا تَبَرُّجَ الْجَاهِلِيَّةِ الْأُولَى وَأَقِمْنَا الصَّلَاةَ وَآتِينَا الزَّكَاةَ وَأَطِعْنَا اللَّهَ وَرَسُولَهُ إِنَّمَا يُرِيدُ اللَّهُ لِيُذْهِبَ عَنْكُمُ الرِّجْسَ أَهْلَ الْبَيْتِ وَيُطَهِّرَكُمْ تَطْهِيرًا. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, Allah wishes to remove the evil from you all, O members of the family of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and Allah wishes to purify you with a thorough purification. So basically, this ayah was revealed after this incident, portraying that the members of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam's family, they are chosen and they are rewarded by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala because they are the household of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So this ayah specifically is giving honor not just to the daughter of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, but even to the son-in-law of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam and the grandchildren of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Again, subhanAllah, it speaks volume about the nature of relationship that the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam had with his son-in-law. Because if you think about it, the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam never had a son. So for those people who are very sad just because they have daughters and no sons, subhanAllah, we can see that there is an example in the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam's life that inshallah with our character we can actually have that kind of relationship with our son-in-laws and make him the kind of son we never had, subhanallah. So the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam and Ali radiallahu anh shared a very beautiful relationship with each other, subhanallah. So going back to the topic of Salma radiallahu anha, why did we mention the event of Kisa over here? Because that hadith is narrated by our mother Salma radiallahu anha, meaning she was the one who witnessed this incident that the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam wrapped his cloak around his daughter, son-in-law, and his grandchildren, and she was the one, Salma radiallahu anha was the one who narrated this hadith. So going back to Salma radiallahu anha, she herself was a very knowledgeable woman, and we can see that by the number of narrations that she recorded. So much so that she comes second in position in terms of women narrators after Aisha radiallahu anha. So number one woman narrator of hadith is Aisha radiallahu anha, and right after her is Salama radiallahu anha. And it's beautiful that once when Salama radiallahu anha was with the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, she asked Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, she asked her husband that why the Holy Quran doesn't mention women a lot. Why does it mostly mention men? Because generally, if you look at the Quran, the term used is Muslimun, Mu'minun, Muhsinun, and that's general term which includes men and women. But mostly that word is taken as, for men. So she said that, Ya Rasulullah, I have this confusion in my mind that why doesn't the Quran mention women specifically, just like it mentions men? And subhanAllah, just because of her question, Allah revealed ayah 35 in the Quran. What is this ayah? Ayah 35 of Surah Ahzab. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala revealed, Innal Muslimina wal Muslimat. Verily Muslim men and Muslim women. Wal Mu'minina wal Mu'minat. And believing men and believing women. Wal Qanitina wal Qanitat. And devout men and devout women. Was Sadiqina was Sadiqat. And truthful men and truthful women. Was Sabirina was Sabirat. And patient men and patient women. وَالْخَاشِعِينَ وَالْخَاشِعَاتِ. And humble men and humble women. وَالْمُتَصَدِّقِينَ وَالْمُتَصَدِّقَاتِ. Men who give charity, women who give charity. وَالصَّائِمِينَ وَالصَّائِمَاتِ. Men who fast and women who fast. وَالْحَافِظِينَ فُرُوجَهُمْ وَالْحَافِظَاتِ. Men who guard their chastity and women who guard their chastity. وَالذَّاكِرِينَ اللَّهَ كَثِيرًا وَالذَّاكِرَاتِ. And men who remember Allah a lot, and women who remember Allah a lot. أَعَدَّ اللَّهُ لَهُمْ مَغْفِرَةً وَأَجْرًا عَظِيمًا. To all of these, Allah has prepared forgiveness for them and an immense reward, a huge reward. SubhanAllah, can you imagine that you're just thinking about a thought in your mind and an ayah of the Quran is revealed just to answer your question, just to remove your doubt, just to clarify your confusion? SubhanAllah, what an honor. Imagine that question, that feeling in the heart was directly sent to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Allah heard her plea and revealed a portion of Quran just to answer her question. SubhanAllah, that's honor. That's, subhanAllah, an honor for Salama radiallahu anha. SubhanAllah. So Salama radiallahu anha, she lived her entire life learning the ahadith of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, studying the Quran, teaching the students, because she lived for a very long time, even after the death of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. She lived to the ripe old age of 84, and she died in the year 62 after Hijrah. And she lived to see the rule of the Khulaf al-Rashideen like Abu Bakr radiallahu an, Umar radiallahu an, Uthman radiallahu an. And Zainab bin Jahash radiallahu anha was the first amongst the Ummhatul Momineen to pass away. And in terms of the wives of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, Salama radiallahu anha was the last one to pass away. And this was during the rule of Yazid bin Muawiyah, and she was laid to rest beside the other wives of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam in Jannatul Baqi. We make dua for her. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala include her amongst her chosen ones, and may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala enable all of us to follow the footsteps of these beautiful women, the wives of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, Ummhatul Momineen, who are truly mother figure for us. May we walk in their footsteps so that we can follow the sunnah of our Prophet, Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam. So with that said, inshallah, we will conclude our session for today. Subhanakallahumma wa bihamdik, nashhadu an la ilaha illa ant, nastaghfiruka wa natubu ilayk. Allahumma salli wa sallim ala nabiyyina Muhammad. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.